The secret sex lives of women in history no one talks about. Through history, the private desires of women have been shrouded in secrecy, hidden behind the rigid structures of patriarchal societies that sought to control their bodies, emotions, and love. But in the shadowed corners of history, behind closed doors and in whispered confessions, countless women have defied the expectations placed upon them, pursuing love, lust, and intimacy on their own terms. Many were forced into a life of deception, living double existences that left them in a state of constant fear. Some found themselves victims of cruel experiments, exorcisms, and punishments so severe that their names were erased from history, their stories buried with them in unmarked graves. After World War II, women were expected to embrace domesticity, slipping into the roles of obedient wives and doting mothers. Yet, beneath the neatly pressed aprons and the suburban ideal, many harbored desires that did not align with societal expectations. For some, this meant secret affairs with men outside their marriage. For others, it meant a longing that could never be openly acknowledged, the pull of another woman's touch. Lesbian relationships flourished in hidden spaces behind the curtains of neighborhood homes, in underground bars, and in the confines of letters that spoke in codes of devotion. The fear of being caught loomed large, for accusations of lesbianism could lead to ruined divorce, the loss of children, forced institutionalization, or even imprisonment. Some were sent to asylums where horrific treatments awaited them: shock therapy, lobotomies, and even forced marriages to correct their unnatural desires. One such tale belongs to Evelyn and Margaret, two housewives from Chicago in the 1950s. By day, they were devoted to their husbands and children. By night, they met in the dimly lit storeroom of a local library, where their fingers traced the spine of forbidden books before reaching for each other. Their love was passionate yet perilous. One exposed letter, one careless whisper, and their lives could have been destroyed. Their worst fear came true one cold November night. Margaret's husband, suspicious of her late-night absences, followed her to the library. When he found her locked in a passionate embrace with Evelyn, his fury knew no bounds. Margaret was beaten so badly that she was unrecognizable. She was taken to an institution the next morning, her family claiming she had gone mad. She never left that place, her letters to Evelyn intercepted and destroyed. Her fate was sealed, and her existence was reduced to a hushed cautionary tale among the neighborhood wives. Women's love and lust for each other were not always erased from history, though they were often rebranded as friendships or unnatural curiosities. In ancient Greece, the poet Sappho of Lesbos penned verses dripping with desire for her female companions, her words a testament to the power of passion between women. While history attempted to sanitize her poetry, the echoes of her longing remain. Sweet mother, I cannot weave, slender Aphrodite has overcome me with longing for a girl. But Sappho was lucky her name was remembered. Countless other women who indulged in forbidden desires were silenced. In Rome, noble women who engaged in affairs with female slaves often disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Some were found floating in the Tiber, their lifeless bodies wrapped in fine silk. Others were poisoned by their own families, their deaths disguised as accidents or sudden illnesses. The Victorian era, often imagined as a time of sexual repression, was also a period of deeply passionate and secretive relationships between women. These relationships were frequently disguised under the term romantic friendships. Women exchanged love letters, engaged in intense physical affection, and even lived together under the guise of companionship. Anne Lister, often regarded as the first modern lesbian, kept detailed diaries of her many affairs with women, written in a secret code that remained undeciphered for decades. She seduced women of high society, slipping into their bedrooms with the stealth of a practiced lover. Her journals spoke of the intensity of these encounters, the secret stolen kisses at candlelight, and the ache of longing when distance kept her from her lovers. But Lister was one of the few who lived on her own terms. Many others who followed their passions were not so fortunate. One such relationship existed between Eleanor Butler and Sarah Ponsonby, two Irish women who defied their families and eloped together in the 18th century. Known as the Ladies of Llangollen, they lived together in an intimate partnership that lasted over 50 years. Though history tried to erase the sexual nature of their bond, their letters revealed the undeniable depth of their connection. However, their story was unusual in that they were left alone. Many women of their time who dared to escape the expectations of marriage were hunted down, forced into convents, or sent to sanatoriums where their wills were broken and their spirits shattered. The consequences for women who stepped outside societal norms were often severe. Women accused of engaging in same-sex relationships were publicly shamed, cast out from their communities, and in some cases, subjected to brutal corrective measures. In the 17th and 18th centuries, women suspected of being involved in lesbian relationships were sometimes burned as witches, their desires seen as unnatural or demonic. In the early 20th century, some women attempted to pass as men to live with their lovers without suspicion. One such woman, Lucy Ann Labdal, dressed as a man and married another woman in 1850s America. She was eventually discovered and sent to an asylum, where doctors tried to cure her of her unnatural inclinations. Lucy died alone, her mind shattered by the treatments forced upon her. Those who resisted these cruel fates had to become masterful deceivers. They spoke in coded language, exchanged books with highlighted passages that hinted at their affections, and created underground communities where they could express their sexuality freely. Some turned to the occult, believing that only in the realm of spirits could they truly be free to love whom they chose. Others formed suicide pacts, choosing death over a life of imprisonment in the bodies and roles they had been assigned. For centuries, history has attempted to erase or diminish the sexual lives of women who loved other women, yet the traces remain in letters, poetry, and secret diaries. Today, we are finally beginning to uncover these hidden stories, recognizing the passion and bravery of those who refuse to be defined by societal constraints. These women existed, they desired, they suffered, and while they may have lived in secrecy, their stories are now finding their way into the light, ensuring that their legacies filled with longing, lust, and the pursuit of forbidden love are never forgotten again. But as we unearth these tales, we must ask, how many more remain buried, lost to the silence of history? Research shows that numerous wives who desired other women were part of a significant yet overlooked narrative. Through a collection of oral histories, diaries, and letters, we uncover stories from over 300 women between 1945 and 1989. These accounts highlight that, despite the era's oppressive norms, many women were not only aware of their desires, but actively pursued same-sex relationships, often within the very neighborhoods where they lived. This act of rebellion against societal conventions illustrates that marriage was not as rigid as the prevailing narratives suggest. Interestingly, several husbands were aware of these same-sex connections, yet most refrained from confronting the issue directly. The dynamics of these relationships were complex. While some men could have leveraged their wives' sexual orientation as a means to gain the upper hand in divorce proceedings, many chose to ignore it. This decision often stemmed from a desire to avoid the stigma of divorce, a reluctance to acknowledge their wives' desires, or perhaps their own infidelities. As the 1970s rolled in, the cultural landscape began to shift even further. The demand for emotional transparency between couples has intensified, alongside a growing movement encouraging individuals to come out about their sexual identities. Wives began to engage more openly with their husbands about their feelings for women, leading some couples to explore alternative marriage arrangements. However, for most, this newfound openness highlighted a fundamental discord between a wife's same-sex attractions and the institution of marriage itself. The impact of these revelations was significant. Divorce rates began to climb as societal taboos faded, with more women opting to separate rather than remain in a traditional marriage. But this was no simple journey of liberation. With the rise of lesbian feminism, the push for women to carve out their own identities often led to legal and social consequences. Wives who sought to break free from marriages faced ruthless challenges in child custody disputes, revealing a harsh reality where seeking happiness came with its own set of obstacles. In essence, the stories of these wives not only served to challenge traditional views of marriage during the post-war period, but also illuminate the broader complexities of love, desire, and identity. They remind us that history is often not black and white, but rather a spectrum of experiences that shape our understanding of relationships today. These depictions often oscillated between two extremes. Wives were either seen as villains abandoning their husbands, or as victims who could return to the fold of normalcy, contingent on their husband's masculine prowess. This framing set the stage for how society perceived female homosexuality, but as the 1970s and 1982 rolled in, the conversation shifted. During these decades, media representation began focusing less on the challenges of a hidden community and more on labeling women involved in same-sex relationships. With anthropologists documenting suburban wives engaging in sapphic activities at swingers clubs, the landscape was shifting. The media, as well as novelists and filmmakers, were keen to delineate between lesbian and bisexual identities, a distinction that had been largely absent in earlier discussions. By the late 1980s, however, there was a notable pushback against these labels. Wives who desired women increasingly took a stand against the constraints of societal classification, asserting that their identities were broader and could not simply be defined by existing categories. Fast forward to today, and we see a different yet familiar narrative. Stories of women, including high-profile celebrities, leaving their male partners for other women are prevalent and often celebrated in the media as symbols of female sexual fluidity. These narratives suggest a progressive shift in societal norms, indicating that women now have more choices than ever before. However, it's crucial to recognize that these tales frequently overlook the persistent issues of gender inequality and legal discrimination that still limit these women's lives. I hope you found the details of this story as fascinating and unsettling as I did. You, mysterious, curious, intellectual, disturbed, beautiful people. My name is Penny Flick, with Kreep-ish. I look forward to sharing more of these stories that captivate and intrigue our minds, which can challenge our way of thinking. Comment on your thoughts below as I continue to uncover the mysteries of our history, true crime, paranormal, conspiracy, and cringe-worthy, creepy content. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember that the truth is often stranger than fiction.